Force base may yet be called upon to be the instruments of American power. And if that day comes, we know you will be prepared.
North Korea is warning the U.S. could face what it calls an unimaginable strike at any time.
North Korea's deputy UN ambassador warns a nuclear war may break out at any moment.
North Korea is issuing a new threat of military action against the U.S. A state news agency says Americans should expect to face an unimaginable strike at an unexpected time. The warning comes just 2 days after a North Korean official said a nuclear war may break out at any moment.
In this latest threat, North Korea also calls the U.S. and South Korea warmongers who may start a nuclear war. Now, this latest threat comes at a time which appears to be a lull in North Korea's missile tests. The country has not launched one in more than a month. But North Korea does appear to be clearly upset about joint military exercises that the U.S. and South Korean navies are currently conducting in waters off the Korean peninsula. This includes the USS Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier, as well as Navy destroyers. Now, the U.S. military says these war games are designed to increase the readiness of U.S. and South Korean forces, but North Korea sees them as a rehearsal for an invasion. The North says these military exercises are driving the tension into the worst line of explosion and prove the U.S. and South Korea are attempting to ignite a war on the Korean peninsula. Now, the military exercises do end on Friday, but next week the U.S. military is planning to hold a rehearsal for how they would evacuate U.S. citizens from South Korea if a war did break out.
It looks as though North Korea is developing a new 2,000-ton submarine capable of launching a long-range ballistic missile. According to U.S. military intelligence sources, the submarine will be the largest the regime has ever built. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
U.S. military intelligence has detected the construction of a new diesel submarine in North Korea's Sinpo shipyard on its east coast. According to Diplomat magazine on Wednesday, U.S. intelligence estimates the sub to be a 2,000-ton vessel capable of launching a submarine-launched ballistic missile, or SRBM. The vessel is the largest the regime has constructed since building its Najin-class frigates. The U.S. intelligence community believes the new sub will succeed the Kwodae-class ballistic missile submarine, the only sub that can launch a Pukguksong-1 SRBM. North Korea has carried out 4 SRBM ejection tests this summer, with the last taking place on July 30th. U.S. intelligence also believes the regime is currently developing a new SRBM known as the Pukguksong-3, which uses an advanced airframe made of lighter composite materials that would increase the range of the missile. Amid increasing ballistic missile threats from the north, the U.S. 6th Fleet test-fired one of its most advanced missile interceptors, the Standard Missile-6, off the Scottish coast. The U.S. 6th Fleet released a statement after the test on Sunday that the SM-6 was launched from an Aegis destroyer and successfully intercepted an incoming ballistic missile. Raytheon, the missile manufacturers, said that the SM-6 is the only missile that can be used for both anti-air and anti-surface warfare, meaning that the missile could be used to counter North Korea's nuclear facilities and intercept the regime's ballistic missiles, which continue to develop rapidly.
A new statement from Pyongyang criticizes ongoing joint military drills between the U.S. and South Korea. It says the two countries are warmongers and the root cause of a nuclear war. New York Times opinion page columnist Nicholas Kristof spent 5 days inside North Korea and wrote a series of articles about his experiences. He discovered North Korea is galvanizing its people to expect a nuclear war with the U.S. Nicholas joins us here at the table. Good morning.
Good morning.
This is your third trip to North Korea, right?
That's correct.
And so how was this different from what you've seen in the past?
So it was very different. I mean, North Korea is always a bizarre place, and there's always a certain amount of over-the-top rhetoric. But this time, the country has really galvanized for war. There's constant talk about missile attacks on the U.S. There are billboards around the country showing missiles destroying the U.S. Capitol, destroying the U.S. flag. There's discussion about how a nuclear war with the U.S. is inevitable, and maybe most striking, about how North Korea will defeat the U.S. in this nuclear war. It's not only survivable, but actually winnable.
They're convinced they would win if a war took place.
Astonishingly, they are convinced that that they would win, and that the U.S. would then retreat ignominiously from the Korean Peninsula, from Japan, from Asia, and Kim Jong-un would unite the Korean Peninsula.
Why are they so confident, Nick?
Well, I mean, of course, it's always very difficult to distinguish what they say versus what they think. But they have a huge network of underground tunnels and underground fortifications. And their narrative is also that they have repeatedly defeated the U.S. in the Korean War and a series of incidents across the DMZ. And there's always a danger, of course, the dictators come to believe their own propaganda. And I'm nervous that that is what is happening right now.
Were you nervous and afraid while you were there yourself? You had handlers the whole time. It didn't seem like you were able to move freely, as you have been in the past.
That's right. I mean, look, reporting in North Korea, you were always very constrained. But in the past, I was able to stay in the center of the city, in a hotel, to walk around. This time, the North Korean Foreign Ministry had handlers that just clung to me like a limpet. They kept me at a guarded foreign ministry compound in the rice paddies outside of town. And I thought, oh, this is to protect the North Koreans from my vigorous questioning. But no, it turns out that they were there to protect me from the security services who might not be on board with having an American journalist in town. And that was a little
thinking they could kidnap you and take you.
Yeah, you know, I don't think it was so much that the security forces would suddenly grab me. I think it was more of a concern that I might engage in some kind of mischief, and then the security forces would grab me, and then there would be a problem.
We know North Korea is probably the biggest national security test that Trump will face. When I was there in May and interviewed President Moon, the president of South Korea, he talked about opening up a bilateral dialogue. Trump talked about that on the campaign. He said sitting knee to knee with the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-Un. Any sense that that dialogue can or will happen?
One of the sad things is that the doves, if you will, the people trying to find an exit ramp in North Korea, just like those in Washington, seem to be marginalized. And so the hardliners seem to be ascendant, both in the North Korean capital, Pyongyang, and in Washington. So I was struck that the North Koreans were not very interested in talks.
So that's interesting because, you know, President Obama's policy was one of strategic patience, right? There wasn't this bellicose rhetoric. Some people criticize that as then letting the North Koreans build up this weaponry.
European leaders are going to gather later on this Thursday to demand North Korea puts a stop to its nuclear and ballistic weapons programs. This according to the final draft statement of the EU summit. The draft says the leaders will tell the regime to abandon its nuclear and ballistic missile programs in a complete, verifiable and irreversible manner.
There is rarely a better time to sell weapons in South Korea. At a time of regional instability, almost every military need was catered for at this year's International Aerospace and Defence Exhibition, providing an opportunity for local developers to show their wares.
We cannot say that Hanwha's weapon system are the world's best. However, performance compared to the price is outstanding. In particular, we can provide solutions customized to each country's needs.
Many of the state-of-the-art weapons used by South Korea are purchased from the United States. But the government wants to change that. South Korea aspires to become a military giant, strengthening the industry by improving its competitive edge. Exports of the locally manufactured T-50 trainer jet in the past 10 years have brought in $2.3 billion. But the company which manufactured the T-50 has been mired in a corruption and embezzlement scandal involving major defence projects.
There have been corruption allegations involving arms procurement process or manufacturers. However, we've set up institutional mechanisms to root out corruption and boost integrity. In the long term, we'll be able to develop weapons while integrity is secured. We'll be able to win the trust from South Korean people and also the international community.
The escalating tension with North Korea has placed a stronger focus on this year's exhibition.
33 countries are showing off their military hardware here. President Moon Jae-in has used the event to contend that the country needs to advance its defence systems to counterbalance North Korea's nuclear threat.
Urgently need to secure enhanced capabilities for our own aerospace and defence industries. We must deploy advanced weapon systems with superior capabilities that can protect the people from North Korea's security threat.
Korea will direct all efforts, he says, into a three-pillar defence system, comprising the toughly named kill chain, a strike system designed to preemptively target North Korean missile sites, the Korean air and missile defence system, and the Korea Massive Punishment and Retaliation Systems, designed to target the North's leadership if South Korea comes under attack.
South Korea's representative for the now stalled six-party denuclearization talks met with its Japanese counterpart for deeper discussions on Pyongyang's nuclear issue.
If you look at it from the North Korean perspective, they have always believed that nuclear weapons would be the key to peace and stability in this region by preventing the United States from, in their view, bullying them. They feel if they can prove they have an effective nuclear deterrent, then perhaps the U.S. will try to talk instead of trying to impose sanctions and making military threats. But the real fear and the growing fear is that if North Korea actually goes through with this kind of a nuclear test, which does seem increasingly likely, the results and the response from the United States, unknown.
No hollow threat. A senior North Korean official has warned the U.S. that it should take Pyongyang's threat of setting off a hydrogen bomb literally, telling CNN that the country has always backed its words with action. Referring to Foreign Minister Lee Yong-ho's remarks last month in New York, when he said the regime would set off an H-bomb in the Pacific, the official said Lee is very well aware of Kim Jong-un's intentions. The official also implied that diplomatic channels between the U.S. and North Korea are non-existent, despite U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson's recent insistence that they are still open. He also said Washington is deeply mistaken if it thinks talking about a military option and even practicing such moves along with sanctions will lead to a diplomatic resolution. North Korea's H-bomb threat was made shortly after President Trump's now famous speech at the UN, where he said the U.S. would, quote, totally destroy the regime.
Flying into the North Korean capital, life on the surface seems normal. Beneath the surface, it's anything but. Overseas North Korean workers are being sent home in droves, their jobs eliminated by UN sanctions. The U.S. calls it punishment for an illegal, dangerous nuclear program. North Korea calls it evil, an economic blockade. On my 16th trip to Pyongyang, I still see signs of growth, plenty of traffic, construction, a steady flow of electricity, keeping the growing skyline bright. But the prospects of a peaceful resolution to the nuclear standoff with the U.S. seem to be growing darker by the day. At North Korea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, thank you so much. We asked to meet with a senior diplomat. Lee Yong-pil agrees to talk, but the mood is tense. His anger at the U.S. palpable.
Donald Trump said he would totally destroy North Korea, a sovereign state.
He's referring to the U.S. president's fiery speech at the UN last month, when he personally insulted a fellow head of state.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un fired back, calling President Trump's behavior mentally deranged. North Korea's foreign minister made a threat that alarmed even longtime Korea watchers.
This could probably mean the strongest hydrogen bomb test over the Pacific Ocean.
Some analysts have accused North Korea of bluster, saying they haven't yet achieved full nuclear capability. And if they go to war, they risk total destruction. But the North Koreans warn the U.S. not to underestimate their resolve and their growing arsenal. Should the world prepare for North Korea to detonate a nuclear device above ground?
The foreign minister is very well aware of the intentions of our supreme leader, so I think you should take his words literally.
Let us begin with Washington's Defense Secretary's Seoul trip. Earlier, he visited the DMZ, where the nation is divided in two. Meeting his Korean counterpart, James Mattis placed extra emphasis on the importance of denuclearizing the out-of-control regime. Kim Hyun-bin has our top story.
U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis arrived in Seoul early Friday for his second visit as Pentagon chief. Mattis toured the frontline units with his South Korean counterpart, Song Yong-mu, and gave a strong message towards North Korea. The U.S. general stressed that Washington's goal is to denuclearize the regime.
Our goal is not war, but rather the complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Defense Minister Song made similar comments, urging Pyongyang to give up its nuclear ambitions.
I urge North Korea should halt its reckless provocations and come back to the negotiating table as soon as possible.
The U.S. defense chief's visit comes as South Korea and the U.S. are scheduled to hold their annual security consultative meeting in Seoul on Saturday, a day after the Allies' military committee meeting. Friday's military committee meeting was led by the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the two allies, General Chung Kyung-do and General Joseph Dunford. Seoul's Defense Ministers Hong Yong-moo and Mattis will hold their official talks at the SCM on Saturday. The allies plan to have in-depth discussions on enhancing extended deterrence against North Korea's ever-expanding nuclear and ballistic missile threats. They are also expected to discuss alliance policies, including the early transfer of wartime operational control from Washington to Seoul, which is one of the key goals of the Moon Jae-in administration. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
U.S. and North Korean officials tell CNN diplomacy has broken down, pushing two nuclear powers dangerously close to military conflict.
The U.S. is talking about a military option and even practicing military moves. They're pressuring us on all fronts with sanctions. If you think this will lead to diplomacy, you're deeply mistaken.
So then I ask, what needs to happen for diplomacy to resume?
The U.S. needs to understand our new strategic power and fundamentally eliminate its hostile policy towards the DPRK.
He says North Korea's leader is following through on a pledge to reach a nuclear balance of power with the U.S., which they say will lead to peace and stability. Even as many around the world worry, the end result could be the exact opposite.
If North Korea were to go through with this atmospheric thermonuclear test, it would be the first the world has seen in nearly 4 decades, since China did it back in 1980. But again, North Korean officials here reiterated this would only be a test to improve their technical knowledge, to send a message that they have this nuclear deterrent. They would not consider this an act of war. Again, in their view, nuclear weapons will guarantee peace, a view counterintuitive to much of the rest of the world who really worry what is going to happen. And then, of course, Michael and Emmer, the big question here, timing, with President Trump's visit to Asia happening in less than 2 weeks.
U.S. Vice President Mike Pence vowed to keep economic and diplomatic pressure on North Korea to make it abandon its nuclear and missile programs. While touring a nuclear weapons base in North Dakota, Pence said the U.S. will use overwhelming military power to defend themselves or its allies against attacks. Pence said America's enemies should never doubt the capabilities of the U.S. armed forces. Minot Air Force Base is home to dozens of B-52 bombers and ICBM sites and is the only U.S. base capable of conducting nuclear strikes by both planes and missiles.
In just a few days, President Trump will travel to another front line of freedom, where so many of your fellow members of the armed forces stand guard to protect our people and our allies and our way of life, the Korean Peninsula. In the face of ongoing threats and provocations by the regime in North Korea, I can assure you the United States will continue to marshal economic and diplomatic pressure to demand that North Korea abandon its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. While President Trump has made clear that the United States has, in his words, great strength and patience, all options are on the table. Our enemies should never doubt the capabilities of the armed forces of the United States of America. Anyone who would threaten our nation should know that America always seeks peace. But if we are forced to defend ourselves or our allies, we will do so with military power that is effective and overwhelming. And those gathered here at Minot Air Force Base will play a critical role again. Now more than ever, your Commander-in-Chief is depending on you to be ready. Stay sharp. Mind your mission and your airmen, and be that credible deterrent that has assured the security of the American people for generations. The brave men and women of Minot Air Force Base may yet be called upon to be the instruments of American power. And if that day comes, we know you will be prepared. Bully. You know, it's deeply humbling for me to stand before you today, before so many heroic Americans. Because you see, while I'm the son of a combat veteran, and I'm the proud father of an aviator in the United States Marine Corps,